Story 1. The backpack was sitting upright. That's the detail that still keeps me up at night. Not the fact that it was there, 12 years after a 9-year-old girl named Lily Crane went missing 2 miles north of that exact spot. Not the faded pink color or the little iron-on butterfly patch her mother had described to investigators in 2011. What got me, what really cracked something open inside me, was that it was sitting upright, leaning neatly against the base of a tulip poplar, like someone had just set it down and walked away to use the bathroom. My name is Dale Mercer. I spent 22 years as a night shift ranger in Pisgah National Forest, and I want to be very clear about something before I tell this story. I am not a man who scares easily. I have found bodies. I have walked through those woods at 3 in the morning in zero visibility fog without a flashlight, just because I knew the trails well enough not to need one. I have seen things out there that most people couldn't handle on their best day. Nothing prepared me for that backpack. It was October, which matters. October in the high sections of Pisgah feels different from any other time of year. The leaves are down by then, and the forest opens up in a way that feels wrong. Like you can suddenly see too far in every direction. The canopy that hides everything in July is gone, and you realize the trees are just thin gray lines between you and a lot of open, empty space. I was doing a pre-dawn sweep of Sector 9, which is a restricted zone we don't allow public access to because of old, unmapped mining shafts in the ground. Kids still find ways in sometimes. I've been doing that sweep every Thursday for 3 years. My flashlight caught the color first. That specific shade of pink doesn't exist naturally in those woods in October. Everything is brown and gray and the dull orange of dead oak leaves. That pink stopped me cold about 40 yards out. I thought it was trash at first. People dump things on forest roads sometimes. Furniture, bags of garbage, things they don't want to pay disposal fees for. But as I got closer, the shape became specific. 2 shoulder straps, a top handle, a front zipper pocket with a small decorative patch, a child's backpack. I didn't touch it. I know better than to touch anything unusual in a restricted zone without protocol. I got on my radio and called it in, keeping my voice even, describing what I was seeing. Dispatch confirmed they'd log it and send someone in the morning. I stayed where I was and waited. While I waited, I turned my flashlight off. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct. The same instinct that makes you go quiet in the woods when you feel like something is watching you. I stood there in the dark with that pink backpack about 10 feet away, and I listened. The forest was completely silent. Not quiet, silent. No insects, no wind movement, no distant animal sounds. October in Pisgah is cold enough that the insects are mostly gone, yes, but there's always something. An owl, the creak of a branch settling, the sound of leaves skittering across the ground. There was none of that. Just absolute, pressurized silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. Then I heard breathing. Slow, measured, calm breathing. Not mine. I was holding my breath. It was coming from my left, about 15 feet into the trees, and it was the breathing of something large enough to produce real volume. Not an animal, not a deer or a bear. The rhythm was too controlled, too deliberate. The way a person breathes when they're trying to breathe quietly, but they've been standing still for a long time, and their body is working against them. Someone was standing in those trees, watching me. I turned my flashlight back on and swept it left in one fast motion. The beam cut through the thin gray tree trunks and caught nothing. No figure, no movement. But the leaves on the ground about 12 feet in were pressed down in a pattern. A rough oval, the kind of compression you get when something heavy has been standing in one place for a while. Fresh. The leaves around the edges were still settling. I did not call out. I did not move toward it. I got back on my radio and requested immediate backup, and I stood facing those trees with my flashlight on until 2 other rangers arrived 23 minutes later. We searched that sector for 4 hours at first light. We found the compressed leaves. We found what appeared to be a partial boot print in a patch of soft soil about 30 yards deeper in. Adult-sized, deep tread, no distinguishing brand markings. We found a second compressed area about 60 yards from the first, same shape, same fresh disturbance. Someone had been walking that sector, stopping, waiting, moving. The backpack went to the county sheriff's office. It took them 11 days to confirm what I already knew in my gut, standing out there in the dark. The iron-on butterfly, the specific shade of pink, a name written in permanent marker on the inside collar tag, faded but readable under UV light. Lily Crane. The investigation that followed found no physical evidence connected to the original disappearance. No remains. No explanation for how the backpack got there, or who had carried it into a restricted zone and left it sitting upright against a tree 12 years after a little girl vanished. The case is still open. I took early retirement the following spring. I still live near the forest. Some mornings I wake up before dawn and lie in the dark, listening to my house settle. And I think about that silence, that breathing, the way someone standing 15 feet away in the dark can disappear in less than a second. I think about whoever placed that backpack upright, carefully, like they were setting down something precious. And I think about why. Story 2. They told me the whistling was probably birds. I believed them the first time. I even believed them the second time, because I was 24 years old and 6 weeks into my first ranger posting, and I desperately wanted to seem like I belonged out there. The third time I reported it, my supervisor, a quiet man named Hendricks, who'd been stationed in Cherokee for 16 years, just looked at me for a moment without saying anything. That look told me more than his words ever did. My name is Marcus Webb, and the summer I spent patrolling Trail 88 in the Bald River Wilderness was the summer I stopped believing that every strange thing has a rational explanation if you just look hard enough. Trail 88 runs through a section of Cherokee National Forest that sees almost no foot traffic. It's not on the popular maps. The terrain is steep and the trail is poorly maintained, and the only reason rangers patrol it at all is because of a cluster of backcountry campsites near the river that technically require permit registration. Most weeks, nobody uses them. The whistling started on my third solo overnight. I was about 4 miles in, setting up my monitoring station near campsite cluster C, when I heard it the first time. A single, clear, 2-note whistle, high-low, like a signal, coming from the tree line about 100 yards uphill to my east. I whistled back, the way you do, the way any normal person would. You hear a whistle in the woods, you assume it's another hiker, and you make yourself known. The response came back immediately. Same 2 notes, but closer. That was the moment I should have paid attention to my body, because something in my chest did a thing I can only describe as locking, a physical tightening. But I was 24 and overconfident, and I told myself I was being ridiculous, so I went back to setting up my station. 30 minutes later, from the opposite side of the campsite, west, not east, the same 2-note whistle again. I stood up. I looked west. Nothing. The tree line was dark and still. I looked east, back toward where the first one had come from. Nothing. I radioed in a routine check and mentioned the whistles casually. That's when Hendricks gave me the non-answer that told me everything. I asked him what birds make a two-note call in that section of Cherokee in July. He said he'd look into it. He didn't look into it. I know because I followed up the next morning and he changed the subject. The fourth patrol is the one that changed me. Same section, different night, 2 weeks later. I was walking the perimeter of campsite cluster C at around 11 p.m. when the whistles started, and this time they didn't stop. 2 notes repeated from multiple points in the surrounding tree line, east, then west, then something that sounded like it was coming from directly above me, from the canopy, which made no physical sense and which I have never been able to explain to my own satisfaction. They were moving, coordinating. I stood in the center of that campsite with my flashlight cutting in every direction, and the whistles kept circling me, always stopping just before my beam reached them, always starting again from a different point. Like whatever was making them was watching my light and staying just outside it. I counted at least 4 separate sources. I tried to convince myself it was a group of hikers running some kind of prank. I called out. I identified myself as a ranger and told them to show themselves. The whistles stopped immediately. Complete silence. I waited 3 full minutes, barely breathing. Then a single whistle, very close, maybe 20 feet, directly behind me. I turned around. Empty trail, empty darkness. The kind of dark that seems to lean toward you. I walked out of that section at a pace that I will not describe as running, but which was not comfortable hiking. 4 miles back to the trailhead, alone, in the dark, and the whistles followed me for the first 2 miles before they stopped. Every time I slowed down, they got closer together. Every time I moved faster, they spread out again, like they were calibrating to me. I filed a full report the next morning. I used the words coordinated human activity and possible organized group concealment. A trail maintenance team checked the section 2 weeks later and found no errors. All markers were in their correct positions. He never told me why he wasn't surprised. Story 3. I had been investigating disappearances connected to the Red River Gorge area for 3 years before I found the camp. I want to be careful about how I tell this story, because some of what I found is still part of an active investigation, and I can't give certain details. But I can tell you enough to explain why I requested a transfer out of Kentucky the week after I found it. My name is Sandra Tolliver. I worked as a missing persons investigator in cooperation with the Forest Service for 11 years. I was good at my job. I was skeptical by nature. I believe in evidence and procedure and the very boring truth that most strange things have mundane explanations. I say this because I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is not the testimony of someone who frightens easily or fills in gaps with imagination. The case that led me underground started with a man named Gary Potts, who disappeared in 2017 while day hiking a trail near the gorge. No distress call, no final GPS ping in an unusual location. He simply didn't come back to his car at the trailhead. Standard search found nothing. The case went cold in 8 months. In 2020, a separate disappearance in the same general area, a woman this time, experienced hiker, proper gear, triggered a cross-reference review of missing persons files in that section of Daniel Boone. I was assigned to pull commonalities. The commonality was a specific half-mile section of trail between 2 gorge access points. 4 separate disappearances over 9 years, all within that corridor, none with physical evidence recovered, none with witnesses.
I went out there with a ranger named Claude Beecham, a 30-year veteran who knew that section of forest better than anyone. And we spent 2 days doing a ground-level search of the terrain off-trail. On the second afternoon, in a ravine about a quarter-mile below the trail, Claude found an entrance. It was a collapsed mining shaft, one of dozens in that region that predate proper records. The entrance had been partially cleared, not by us, not recently by any maintenance crew. Cleared by hand, with tools, over time. There were marks on the stone around the entrance that were not natural erosion. We went in about 40 feet before we found the camp. I am going to be specific because specificity is what makes this real. There were living quarters. Not a sleeping bag and a lantern. Living quarters. A cot frame with a foam mattress. A plastic storage system with food supplies organized by category. A battery-operated lighting setup. A portable toilet. A folding table with what appeared to be a daily journal on it, written in a cramped, tight handwriting that filled every page completely, margin to margin. Someone had been living in that space, possibly for years. The journal entries were dated. The most recent was 4 days before we found the camp. Whoever had been there had left very recently, either by coincidence or because they knew we were coming. I will not describe the content of the journal in detail. I'll say that it included what appeared to be observation notes, detailed, regular, dated observation notes about trail activity above, hikers, times, descriptions, numbers of people in groups, whether they were alone. The names Gary Potts and one other name from my missing persons files appeared in those notes. We sealed the site, called in a federal team, and I was escorted out of the area within the hour. I was asked not to discuss the specifics of what I'd found and was given a standard non-disclosure procedure to follow, which I've respected here by staying within its boundaries. What I can tell you is this. Someone chose to live underground, in the dark, in a hand-cleared mining shaft in one of the most remote sections of Daniel Boone National Forest for what appears to have been a very long time. They monitored trail activity above them. They kept records. And when we found their home, they were gone. Not gone far, just gone.
Story 4. The tower had been empty for 3 years before they sent me up. Budget cuts, staffing shortages, the usual reasons. The Forest Service had been relying on satellite monitoring, but a dry summer and 2 close-call fires in the western Virginia ridgelines convinced someone to reinstate the Human Watch program. I volunteered for the Elliott Knob rotation because I'd done fire watch before and I genuinely liked the solitude. 4 weeks alone in a tower with a radio and a view of 4 counties sounded like a vacation to me. My name is Teresa Bowman, and I want to tell you about the 14th night. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I expected. Quiet. The kind of quiet that city people think they want until they experience it and realize it has a weight to it. I tracked weather patterns, logged visibility reports twice daily, read 3 books, and felt genuinely peaceful. There's something grounding about being the highest point in your visible world. On the 12th day, I noticed the truck. It was parked on the Forest Service access road about a mile below the tower. A dusty, pale green pickup, older model, no markings. I noted it in my log because vehicles on that road are unusual. The road isn't gated, technically, but it's also not on any public map and doesn't lead anywhere except the tower access path and a dead-end utility clearing. The truck was there on the 12th day, the 13th, the 14th. On the evening of the 14th day, I was doing my sunset visibility scan with my binoculars. Standard procedure, full 360 rotation, and I turned south toward the access road and found someone standing at the base of the tower. Just standing there, looking up. I couldn't make out detail from that height, only a figure, adult-sized, still. No hiking gear that I could identify, no vehicle visible from that angle. They had approached on foot or come up through the trees where the access road wasn't visible. I got on my radio immediately, reported an unidentified individual at the tower base. Dispatch acknowledged and said they'd try to reach the nearest ranger unit, which was 40 minutes away on a good road day. When I looked back down, the figure was gone. I searched the full visible perimeter with my binoculars for 20 minutes. Nothing. The tree line below the tower is thick and comes within about 60 feet of the base. Someone could be standing in it, and I'd see nothing from above. The door to the tower is accessed by a staircase, an exterior metal staircase, the kind that rings when you walk on it. I had never turned the lower-level door lock because there was no reason to. The tower had been empty for 3 years. Nobody came up here. I locked it that night. At 2:17 a.m., the staircase rang. A single step. The specific sound of weight on the 3rd or 4th step from the bottom. I know that sound because I'd walked those stairs twice a day for 2 weeks, and I knew every ring in them. 1 step, then silence. I sat in the tower cab with my radio in my hand and my flashlight off, looking down through the cab floor grate at the dark staircase below me. I did not move for 45 minutes. I heard nothing else. In the morning, the truck was gone from the access road. I told myself it was a curious local, someone who'd heard the tower was staffed again and had come up for a look, maybe been embarrassed when I'd spotted them, left before dawn. I told myself the step sound was thermal contraction. The metal stairs cool fast at elevation. I almost convinced myself. On the 21st day, I found handwriting on the tower's lower exterior wall. It was at standing height, written in what looked like black marker or charcoal, partially sheltered from rain by the overhang. It said one sentence: "I can see your light from down here." No name, no date. Written facing inward toward the staircase, where whoever had written it had been standing with their back to the forest, looking up at where I slept. I finished my rotation. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe. Or the knowledge that if I left, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what the 4th week would have brought. Nothing happened the last 7 days. That somehow was the most frightening part. Story 5. We set trail cameras throughout the backcountry for wildlife monitoring. It's standard. Motion-triggered, time-stamped, waterproof housing, strapped to trees about chest height. I'd been pulling and reviewing camera cards for years without anything that made me pause longer than the time it took to log it. The camera on the Cranberry Backcountry Perimeter Trail, Station 14 specifically, was positioned to track bear movement in a corridor between 2 ridgelines. It had been in place for 3 seasons. I pulled its SD card on a Tuesday in September. My name is Pete Calloway, and what I found on that card took me about 3 hours to fully process. The card covered 62 days of captures. Most were what you'd expect. 3 black bears using the corridor regularly, a bobcat, deer, the usual bird activity. The timestamps ran continuous from July through September. At 4:44 a.m. on August 9th, the camera captured a person. They were standing directly in front of the camera, facing it, which means they either knew exactly where it was or had found it in the dark by following the trail. The image was clear. The camera had good night vision capability. The person was wearing dark, non-reflective clothing, no markings I could identify. They were holding something in front of their chest that the image resolution didn't allow me to identify clearly. A bag, possibly,
or a case of some kind. They stood there for exactly 11 minutes. The camera triggered 17 times in that window, a new image every 40 seconds. 17 images of the same person in the same position, facing the camera. On the 18th image, they were gone. That alone would have been enough to report. A person in the restricted backcountry at 4:44 in the morning, stationary in front of a wildlife camera for 11 minutes. That's unusual. That's worth logging. But then I got to August 23rd. On August 23rd, at 3:19 a.m., the camera captured the same person. Same clothing, same position, same object held in front of them. I compared the images side by side. The posture was identical. The distance from the camera was identical. If the timestamp hadn't been different, I would have assumed I was looking at the same image twice. They stood there for 14 minutes that time. 21 captures. On the 22nd image, the second to last before they disappeared, they had moved closer to the camera. Just slightly, maybe a foot, but enough that their face was slightly more defined in the image. They were looking directly into the lens. I found 5 more visits across the 62-day period, always between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., always the same body position, always facing the camera. The duration of each visit was slightly longer than the last, and in the final 2 visits, they were carrying what I could now identify, in better resolution, as a camera of their own. They were photographing our trail camera, or photographing through our trail camera, toward whatever the camera was pointed at, toward the bear corridor behind its field of view. I flagged it, reported it, and a ranger team swept the corridor and found nothing. No camp, no sign of recent habitation, no secondary camera equipment. But on the sweep, one of the other rangers found something I haven't been able to shake. About 30 yards off the trail, in the brush, facing back toward Station 14, facing toward where the trail camera was, someone had pressed a small, flat stone into the soft ground. On its face, scratched into the stone surface, was what looked like a rough grid, 8 by 8 squares, like a chart or a calendar. Most of the squares had small marks in them, X's or tally marks. Counting something, keeping track. We never identified who it was. The boots in the soft ground near the stone were a common tread, unhelpful for narrowing anything down. The investigation was closed for insufficient evidence. Station 14 was moved to a new position the following spring. I pulled that card first out of all of them. The first 62 days from the new position were clean. I still pull it first.
Story 6. We found the footprints at first light after a night of hard rain. They were fresh, pressed into the trail mud in that crisp, detailed way that only happens in the first few hours after rain, before the edges start to crumble. Standard hiking boot, adult, moving north along the trail at a consistent pace. The pattern suggested someone walking purposefully, not stumbling, not struggling with terrain. We had been searching for an overdue solo hiker named James Farrow since the previous afternoon. Farrow was a 41-year-old from Charlottesville, experienced, proper gear, who had started the Old Rag approach on a Friday and was due back at the trailhead by Saturday evening. When he didn't show, his wife called it in. My name is Brian Coates, and I've done search and rescue in Shenandoah for 9 years. And what happened with those footprints was the first time I genuinely could not explain something I'd personally witnessed. We followed them north for about 0.6 of a mile. The prints were consistent the entire way. Same depth, same stride length, same boot pattern. Then they stopped.
Not faded, not obscured by rock or dry ground. Stopped. The last clear print was a full left foot impression in deep mud at the edge of a flat section of trail, and then nothing. The mud continued for another 30 feet before giving way to exposed rock. If whoever made those prints had continued onto the rock, there would have been transfer. Wet boots on stone leave marks, at least for a few steps. There was nothing on the stone, not a smear, not a partial. I got down on my knees and examined the final print and the surrounding mud closely. There were no signs of the pattern changing, no evidence the person had turned around, backtracked, or stepped off the trail to the side. The vegetation on both sides of the trail at that point was low fern and ground cover. If someone had stepped into it, there would be disturbance. The ferns on both sides were untouched. I called my team together, and we spent the next 2 hours working outward from that final print in every direction. We found nothing. No continuation, no secondary trail, no indication that a person had been anywhere in the vicinity except for those 0.6 of a mile of clean, consistent, definitive boot prints. I've worked enough searches to know what I was looking at, and what I was looking at was a set of prints that walked to a specific point and terminated. That is not something that happens. People don't evaporate. They step somewhere next, and that somewhere leaves evidence. We found James Farrow at 2 p.m. that afternoon, roughly 1.5 miles south of the footprint trail, in a creek drainage below the trail. He was hypothermic, but alive. He had not been on the northern approach since the previous morning. He had never reached the section where we found the prints. His boots did not match the tread. The boots that made those prints belonged to someone else. Someone who had walked 0.6 of a mile on a trail in the Shenandoah backcountry in the hours after a storm and disappeared without leaving a trace of where they went next. I put it in my report. The exact wording I used was unidentified individual, direction of travel unknown, present in search zone, whereabouts not determined. My supervisor read it, made a note, and asked me if I was getting enough sleep. I don't think about it every day anymore. But when I do night searches in that section now, I think about it. I think about whoever was walking that trail in the dark and the rain, moving north with purpose. And I think about where they went when the mud ran out. I don't have an answer. I've stopped expecting one.
Story 7. The cabin had been my home for 2 years before I understood I was being watched. I want to say that slowly so you understand what it means. 2 years. 700 and some days of living in a 1,200 square foot Forest Service cabin at the edge of the snowbird wilderness, doing maintenance patrols, managing the station, and genuinely feeling, like I was completely alone out there. My name is Aaron Whitfield. I chose that posting because I wanted isolation. I'm honest about that. I'd come through a difficult few years personally, and the idea of living somewhere that required a 40-minute drive on a 1-lane road to reach the nearest gas station sounded like exactly what I needed. The Forest Service needed someone willing to winter over at Snowbird, which most rangers weren't. The arrangement worked. The first thing I noticed was the tree. About 60 yards from the cabin, on a slight rise to the northwest, there was a mature oak that I'd looked at every day for 2 years. Wide canopy, good bark, the kind of tree that's been standing for over a century. I knew it the way you know all the fixed things around your home. In winter, with the leaves gone, you could see the full shape of it from the cabin windows. In January of my 3rd year, I noticed a shape in the lower branches. About 15 feet up, I assumed it was a nest at first. Something large had nested there over the fall. But the shape was wrong for a nest. Too vertical, too dense. I walked out to it on a clear afternoon with binoculars. It took me about 4 seconds to understand what I was looking at. Someone had built a platform in that tree. A small one, just wide enough to sit or kneel on, braced between 3 branches, made from cut lumber that had been stained dark to match the bark. It was angled to face the cabin. There was a depression in the platform wood where something had rested repeatedly, smooth and worn, the right shape and size for a pair of elbows. Someone had been watching my cabin from that tree, from 60 yards away, elevated to give them a clear sightline through the cabin windows, for long enough that the platform wood showed significant wear at the contact points. I reported it. A team came out, took samples and measurements, found no fingerprints due to weathering, found no DNA evidence under the conditions. The platform had been there for at least 1 full season based on the weathering pattern, possibly 2, possibly the entire time I'd lived there. That was disturbing, but the next part was worse. When the investigative team went through the surrounding area, they found 2 more platforms, different trees, different angles. Together, the 3 positions formed a rough triangle around the cabin, each one covering a section of the exterior that the others couldn't see from their angle. 3 positions, systematic coverage of the entire structure. Someone had not just watched my cabin. Someone had watched my cabin from multiple rotating positions to ensure there was no angle that couldn't be observed. I moved out of that cabin within a week. I told the Forest Service I needed a station transfer for personal reasons. They processed it without much question. I still think about what it means that I lived normally for 2 years, cooking dinner, sitting by the window at night, going to bed at the same time, living my routine, while someone sat in trees 60 yards away and watched me do it. Watched me without ever making contact, without ever doing anything except watching. I've talked to people about why someone would do that and stop there. Why watch and never act? The most unsettling answer I've gotten is also the simplest one. Maybe the watching was the point. Story 8. In the military, you learn to read ground sign. It's a skill that becomes automatic, the way your eyes process terrain for information without you consciously deciding to look. Boot impressions, disturbed brush, fire ash, weight distribution. You stop seeing landscape and start seeing data. That skill is what made the fires so disturbing to me, because I couldn't make the data add up. My name is Ray Dunstan. I spent 8 years in the Army before transitioning to forest ranging, and my posting to the restricted sections of Jefferson National Forest felt comfortable to me in a way that civilian postings hadn't. Remote, physically demanding, requiring real navigation skills. I was good at it. Zone 4 in the Mount Rogers Recreation Area had been under fire restriction for 2 seasons due to drought conditions. No open flame of any kind, not even a camp stove in certain sections. The restriction was clearly posted and routinely enforced. Fines were significant. People generally complied, except someone didn't. The first fire was reported by a satellite heat sensor, a small, recent campfire site in the interior of the zone, about 3 miles from any legal access point. I went in and found it on a Tuesday morning. Recent ash, still slightly warm at the center. A fire ring built from local stone, carefully constructed, the stones placed with some skill. The surrounding area had been cleaned. No food waste, no garbage, no tent impressions. Whoever had been there had left no trace except the fire itself. The second fire was 2 weeks later, half a mile east. Same construction, same clean site, same complete absence of identifiable evidence. By the sixth fire, over a period of about 3 months, I had enough data to see the pattern. The fires were moving in a rough spiral through the zone. Each one was slightly deeper into the restricted area than the last. They were occurring between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., based on the ash temperature when I found them in the morning. The fire rings were always built from locally available stone, always the same design, always the same approximate size. Same person, same technique. Deliberate, systematic movement through the zone. I set up a watch position on the 8th week, a concealed overnight observation post on the ridge above the section where the pattern suggested the next fire would appear. I went in early, established position, and waited. At 2:23 a.m., I smelled smoke from the wrong direction. Not from the valley below me where I'd set the watch. From behind me, higher up on the ridge. I turned and saw the glow. A small, controlled fire, maybe 200 yards up and back in the trees. In a section I had not predicted. In a section that required passing through my observation position to reach. Unless they had come in from a different access entirely. From above. From a route I hadn't known existed. By the time I reached it, the fire had been stamped out. Not recently, within the last 10 or 15 minutes. The stone ring was there. The same construction. On the flat stone that formed the back of the ring, there was something I hadn't seen at any of the previous sites. Written in what appeared to be charcoal, from the fire itself, a single word. Hello. I have thought about that word a lot. What it means that they knew I was there. What it means that they'd been watching me set up my watch position, had gone around me, and had left that word on a stone for me to find. Hello. They had seen me before I had seen them. Every time.
Story 9. I was the least experienced person on that trail that day. The couple I was escorting, a pair of retired school teachers from Ohio named Douglas and Evelyn Moore, had been backpacking in the Smokies for 20 years. I had been a ranger for 11 weeks. This is important context for what happened, because for a long time afterward, I told myself that the couple must have been wrong, that I was the professional and they were the confused ones. I've stopped telling myself that. My name is Colby Marsh, and I want to talk about what Douglas Moore said when we got back to the trailhead that evening. He said, "I've hiked this loop 7 times. The creek crossing on the north section is never where we found it today. It moved." I nodded when he said it. I wrote it in my log because I was required to log comments from permit holders. I filed it under anomalous observations and thought about it for about 30 seconds. Then I looked at my own map. The creek crossing on the north section of the Hazel Creek Backcountry Loop is marked at a specific waypoint. I'll call it marker 14N, and that waypoint is 0.4 miles from the ridge junction. I had used that number to orient myself when I took the group through. I knew where I was. Except when I checked the actual measurement that evening, distance from the ridge junction to where we had actually crossed the creek. It was 0.7 miles, not 0.4. We had walked nearly twice as far between those 2 points as the trail was supposed to be. I assumed a GPS error. I assumed I'd miscounted. I found 4 separate explanations before I fell asleep that night and accepted each of them in sequence. But Douglas Moore had said it without seeing my map. He had said it based on 20 years of walking that trail. And what he had said matched what my numbers showed. Something in that section of the Hazel Creek Loop was different than it had been. The creek crossing had appeared further from the junction than it should have been.
The total loop time had been 40 minutes longer than any of my pre-trip calculations. We had not stopped longer than expected. We had not moved slower than a normal pace. We had walked further than the trail was long. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning, phrased very carefully as a discrepancy in trail measurement data, suggesting possible signage or waypoint error. A trail maintenance team checked the section 2 weeks later and found no errors. All markers were in their correct positions. All distances matched the official trail data. I talked to other seasonal rangers about it, quietly. One of them, a woman named Priya, who'd been at Hazel Creek for 3 seasons, looked at me for a moment when I described it, and then said, "What section was the couple from?" When I told her, she said, "Yeah, don't put in for that section again." I asked her why. She just said, "Other people have gotten mixed up in there. It's a weird pocket. Just don't." I never got a better explanation than that. I transferred out of the Smokies the following spring, and I haven't gone back. The Moores sent me a Christmas card that year. In the notes section, Douglas had written, "Fine trip overall. We won't go back to Hazel Creek." He didn't explain why. He didn't need to.
Story 10. The beacon coordinates put the missing hiker at grid reference 41.6 by minus 79.1, which I pulled up on my topographic map and stared at for about 20 seconds before I called it in to confirm, because that coordinate sits in the middle of an area that has no trails, no structures, no water access, and no rational reason for a human being to be standing in it. The Tionesta Scenic Area Old Growth Interior is not a place people accidentally wander into. You have to make a series of deliberate decisions to get there. Off the trail, at a specific point, through difficult terrain, across a drainage that's chest deep in spring. And the person whose beacon was pinging those coordinates had made all of those decisions, or had been taken there. My name is Nathan Griggs, and I want to explain what I found at those coordinates, which was not a missing hiker. The hiker, a 28-year-old graduate student named Owen Marsh, had been reported missing by his field research supervisor after failing to return from a solo botany survey in the Tionesta area. His emergency beacon had been registered to his university's outdoor program. The signal had been active for approximately 14 hours when I received the coordinates and went in. It took me 4 hours to reach the coordinate location. The terrain was exactly as bad as the topo suggested. When I finally reached the general area, I used the beacon receiver to narrow down the exact point, and it led me to the base of a red maple, about 30 feet off a dry creek bed. The beacon was attached to the maple's trunk. Just the beacon device alone, clipped to a branch stub at about shoulder height with its own carrying clip. No pack, no hiker, no signs of a camp or a resting spot. Someone had removed the beacon from Owen Marsh and attached it to a tree in the middle of nowhere. Or Owen Marsh had attached his own beacon to a tree in the middle of nowhere and walked away. The search expanded from that point. I marked the beacon location and began working outward in a spiral pattern. Within about 200 meters, I found Owen Marsh's pack. Full, organized, nothing missing as far as I could assess, propped against a fallen log. His water filter was in the outer pocket. His emergency kit was intact. His rain jacket was packed. Within 50 meters of the pack, I found his field notebook, open to a page of specimen notes that stopped mid-sentence. His pen was still in the spiral binding. Within 20 meters of the notebook, I found his boots, both of them, side by side, neatly placed, toes forward, as if set down by someone getting ready for bed. Owen Marsh was found 2 days later by a second search team,
7 miles south of the beacon location, at a trailhead he had no way to have reached in a direct route from the interior. He was dehydrated and disoriented, but physically uninjured. He had no memory of anything after about the 3rd hour of his survey day. No memory of removing his beacon. No memory of removing his boots. No memory of the 4 hours between his last clear recollection and whatever state he was in when he apparently walked 7 miles south in his socks. The case was classified as a medical event, a possible dissociative episode linked to environmental stress. The university accepted that. His supervisor accepted that. I don't have a better explanation, but I've looked at the map of that interior many times since, and I keep thinking about the deliberateness of the scene. The beacon on the tree, the pack against the log, the notebook open and mid-sentence, the boots placed neatly, toes forward. That's not what a dissociative episode looks like when someone does things randomly in a confused state. That's a scene that was arranged, carefully, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Whether that person was Owen Marsh or someone else, I still don't know.
Story 11. I have been a ranger in these hills since 1987. That's 38 years of night patrols, early mornings, hard winters, and things that don't make sense if you think about them too long. I've seen enough strange things in the dark to know the difference between a strange thing and a wrong thing. The night someone called my name for hours was a wrong thing. My name is Walt Hensley. I was born 15 miles from where I work. My father worked timber in these hills. My grandfather knew every hollow and drainage in the eastern sections by name, names that don't appear on any official map, names passed down from families that settled this country 200 years ago. I know this land the way most people know their own living room. That's why what happened on the night of September 14th, 3 years ago, is so hard to explain. Because it happened on ground I know, in a hollow I have walked hundreds of times. At 2 in the morning, alone, with nobody else scheduled for that section. The voice started about half a mile in. It called my name. Walt. Clear and distinct. A human voice, adult, male, coming from upslope to my left. Not loud. The tone you use when you're trying to get someone's attention without alarming them. I stopped and listened. I called back, identified myself as a ranger, asked if someone needed assistance. Silence. I waited, then continued. 3 minutes later, Walt. Same voice, same tone, same direction, upslope left. But I had moved a quarter mile down the trail, and the voice had moved with me. It was not calling from a fixed point. It was tracking my position. This continued for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know the exact time because I logged every instance on my radio from the beginning. Time, approximate direction, approximate distance. The voice called my name 47 times over that period. Always that same flat, clear, neutral Walt. Never anything else. Never a different word. Never a different tone. The distance varied. Sometimes it felt close, 30, 40 feet. Sometimes it was further back, like it had retreated. But it never stopped. It followed me for the entire patrol loop, through the hollow, up the ridge trail, back down the eastern access. I have been asked many times since, why didn't you go toward it? Go into the trees and see what was there. The honest answer is that I've been doing this for 38 years, and something that old inside me said, "Do not go into those trees." I trust that something. I have trusted it my whole career, and it has kept me whole. Whatever wisdom 38 years in the dark hollow builds in a man, that night it was unanimous. Do not go into those trees. I radioed for backup after the first 20 minutes. A ranger named Sam arrived on the ridge trail from the northern access about 40 minutes later. He heard it too. He heard it call my name twice while he was standing next to me. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. We swept the slope together. We found nothing. No person, no tracks that we could identify as fresh in the dark. The voice stopped when Sam arrived. It did not resume. In 38 years, I've heard most of the sounds this forest makes. Animals, wind, acoustic tricks of the hollow where sounds carry strange distances. I've heard all of it. What I heard that night called my name like a person, like someone who knew me, like someone who had been told a specific name to call and was calling it over and over, patiently, waiting for me to respond. I've asked around about it, quietly, among people who've been out here long enough to know what I mean when I say a wrong thing versus a strange thing. Most of them just nod. A few of them say, "Yeah, don't answer it." Nobody says it like it's new information.
Story 12. I came back to ranging at 57 because they needed a warm body and I needed something to do after my husband passed. Blunt truth. I'd been retired for 4 years and the days had gotten long, and when my old district supervisor called and asked if I'd cover a 2-month vacancy at the Cohutta station in Georgia, it felt like the right kind of problem to walk into. My name is Carol Sutton, and I want to tell you what happened on Forest Road 18, because it happened twice, both times while I was driving a route I'd driven 100 times in my earlier tenure. And the second time, I got out of the truck and checked, and what I found still doesn't have an answer. Forest Road 18 in the Cohutta Wilderness runs about 14 miles from the Northern District entry gate to the interior trailhead clearing. It's paved for the first 4 miles, then gravel, then packed dirt for the final stretch. There are no intersections, no side roads, no branches. It is a single road that goes in one direction and ends. I was driving the evening perimeter check on my 3rd week back, late October, overcast, about 9 p.m. The road was familiar. I'd driven it in daylight a dozen times already in my 3 weeks, and I'd driven it in the dark many times years earlier. I knew every bend, every grade change, every section where the tree canopy changes character. At about the 9-mile marker, I passed a car. Pulled to the right shoulder, engine running, headlights on. A dark sedan, current model, no visible damage. I slowed, flagged my lights, and checked my mirror to see if the driver responded. Nobody was in the car. Both front doors were closed. The car was running, lights on, and empty. I pulled over about 50 yards ahead, called it in as an unoccupied vehicle on FR 18 at mile 9, and walked back to it. I checked the interior with my flashlight. No one inside. Nothing unusual visible in the back seat. No keys in the ignition. The car was push-button start, and the engine was just running. No bag, no jacket, no phone visible. The fuel gauge through the window read about a quarter tank. I waited 15 minutes, and nobody came back to the car. Then I got back in my truck, noted the plate number, and continued the perimeter check. When I came back on my return pass, same road, same direction, about 40 minutes later, the car was gone. not moved down the road. Gone. The shoulder where it had been was empty dirt. No tire tracks pulling out. The soft shoulder would have shown clear tracks from a turn. The tracks from where it had been parked were there, pressed into the soft earth. The departure tracks were not. I told myself the driver had returned while I was on the interior section, turned around, and driven back out the way they'd come, which would explain why I hadn't passed them on my return. That's possible. That's rational. But 2 nights later, same road, approximately the same section, I passed the car again. Same car. Same dark sedan. Same plate number. Running, lights on, driver's side window now cracked open about 2 inches. Parked on the right shoulder. I stopped this time immediately. Got out. Walked up to the driver's window. A woman was sitting in the driver's seat. She was looking straight forward through the windshield with both hands on her lap. Not on the wheel. In her lap. She was not sleeping. Her eyes were open. She did not look at me when I came to the window. She did not look at me when I spoke to her. She did not look at me when I put my flashlight near the glass. I knocked on the window and identified myself clearly as a forest ranger. She blinked, turned her head slowly toward me, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as someone emerging from a very deep place. Not frightened, not surprised, just returning. She was fine. She told me she was fine. She said she'd pulled over to check her phone and had lost track of time. She declined further assistance. She started the car, it had been running already, and drove back toward the entrance. I stood there in the road and watched her taillights disappear north, and I felt the particular unease of something that looks fine, sounds fine, and still isn't sitting right. I checked the registration on the plate when I got back to the station. It came back clean, registered to a home address in Atlanta. I had no grounds for any further action. But I went back to that section of FR 18 the following afternoon in daylight, and I walked the shoulder where both cars had been parked, and I looked at the ground and the tree line beyond it. The trees there come right to the road edge, dense, old-growth canopy. In the soft soil at the base of the tree line, running parallel to the road, there were impressions, too irregular for a trail, more like a walking path that had been used many times over a long period, worn into the ground by repetition. Starting at the tree line and running, as far as I could follow it, south. Not toward the trailhead, not toward any marked feature on any map I had. Just south, into the interior, getting narrower as the canopy got heavier, disappearing into the dark between the trees. I stood there for a while, looking at it. I did not follow it. I think about that choice sometimes. The path went somewhere. Something had made it by walking it over and over in the same direction. Maybe deer, maybe people, maybe a combination of both over years, wearing the same line into the same soil for different reasons. I think about the woman in the car, sitting with her hands in her lap, staring through the windshield at those trees. I think about what she might have been looking at. What might have pulled her off the road and held her there, eyes open but elsewhere, while the engine ran and the night got darker. I finished my 2-month assignment in Cohutta and went back home. My supervisor asked if I wanted to extend the contract. I said no. He didn't push it. I still don't know what was at the end of that path. I still think about the woman's expression when she turned toward me. That slow return, like coming up from deep water. Like she'd been somewhere else entirely, and I had interrupted the journey. And sometimes, in the particular silence of my house at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. I wonder if she ever went back. I wonder if she finished it.